We were all patiently awaiting the release of the Supreme Court opinion on Roe and Casey. Many expect Roe and Casey to be overturned and for abortion to become an issue of the states. Should that happen, far leftists are planning more acts of terrorism. I say more because they're already doing it. The latest story is that the night of rage flyers are popping up in D.C. ahead of the Roe v. Wade decision. Over the past several weeks, we've waited eagerly as opinion days, as they're called, occur. The Supreme Court releases their opinions on many cases. Everybody sits by waiting as Supreme Court from about 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. reveals their opinions on certain cases. So far, the decision on Roe and Casey has not come down. Though the leak happened some time ago, everyone is just waiting patiently for it to happen. I don't think it's tomorrow. I think Thursday is the next opinion day. I'm not sure. Some have said that it was going to be Tuesday and Thursday because yesterday was the federal observation of Juneteenth. But it could also be next week. Who knows? The Supreme Court could put it way off. But this right here, the threat of terror, the firebombing of pregnancy centers, suggests that civil war is rising. Yeah, I know. I talk about it a lot, but I got to tell you guys, I don't think I'm wrong. Of course, I don't think I'm wrong. Maybe some of you do, but I think at this point, if you're ignoring the signs, it's just wishful thinking, normalcy bias or optimism bias. Last night on Timcast IRL, we were joined by Mary Morgan of Pop Culture Crisis, another one of Timcast.com's shows. And she said, nothing ever happens. The internet is fake. She doesn't think anything is going to happen. Maybe she's right. Or maybe she's just young. I take a look at the violence that we're already seeing. I take a look at the court case, Texas v. Pennsylvania, or the Texas GOP saying they don't recognize Joe Biden as legitimately elected, which is shocking. It's absolutely shocking. I take a look now at depending on which source you use, 20 plus pro-life targets that have been attacked with either fire bombs or vandalism. And it's not just my opinion. There are many who have written about the possibility of civil war. There are many who have written that we are in the precursor to civil war. And some have even suggested that abortion could be the major moral catalyst, not unlike civil war. Well, my friends, either because we are thirsty for escalation, either in our writing or in our politics, or because it is true, we now have an article talking about how what we are seeing, Jane's Revenge, they call it, the far left terror group, they are arguing that we could be entering the bleeding Kansas phase of civil war. It took place about 6 or so years before the Civil War, and it was a Kansas Territory internal civil war over whether or not Kansas would be a free state or a slave state. Now, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. For obvious reasons, we are not going to experience the same kind of civil war the U.S. experienced a long time ago. I mean, for one, weapons are different. Communication is way different, much faster. The borders between states matter a whole lot less. Geography played a huge role in the first Civil War. Texas basically said we had to join the South because of geography. We were locked out from everywhere else. California, however, was a free state, despite all the territories around it being, well, just territories. Something is happening. The Bleeding Kansas phase was a famous period, notably giving rise to the legacy of John Brown, who you may know as the guy who led the raid on Harper's Ferry, was captured and hanged for treason. He's a Civil War hero to those who believe in abolition. He was an abolitionist. But many thought he was a crazy person. History is written by the victors, and to this day, John Brown is celebrated as a good guy. Now, I think some of the things he did, horrifying. I think what he fought for was the right thing to fight for. But a lot of those same issues, a lot of similar issues around states' rights, around whether or not the federal government would actually uphold the law, they're happening now before our eyes. And the FBI says they are investigating these attacks. Republicans are demanding that the group Jane's Revenge be labeled as domestic terrorists. Can they? I don't know. I just think that what we're seeing here in the U.S. with the January 6 hearings, with the inability or unwillingness of the federal government to go after the far left in the same way they go after the right, it shows you there's a clear delineation. Some have political power and establishment authority, and they will wield it. And many of us, we don't have that. It's not just about what's happening with these pro-life centers. It's not just about what's happening with January 6th. It's about what's happening with me, with Timcast. You guys know that we were subjected to 8 swattings, and that's just our studio. I've had private residences that nobody knows about. Somehow, the tenants there were swatted. We've had bomb squad show up, credible threats. You'd think this would be an extremely high priority, right? For some reason, it's not. The media won't cover it. They're not talking about it. Yet, a crying journalist, that's front page, front and center. There is a clear delineation before our eyes. You can see it. It seems like these people on the far left continually get away with their crimes because I think civil war is coming. And it's kind of clear, isn't it? The same thing happened in the first Civil War. The federal government wasn't enforcing laws in the North, and so the South said, we're done. Maybe it'll happen again. I don't know. But let's read the story and see what's going on with the far-left terror group Jane's Revenge and the Night of Rage. And I want to talk to you about when the Democrats tried to overthrow the election, and so did many prominent celebrities. Before we get started, head over to timcast.com and become a member to help support our work. As a member, you get access to exclusive segments from the Timcast IRL podcast, uncensored, not family friendly, Monday through Thursday at 11 p.m. You'll be supporting our journalists, for which we just hired a couple more. We are launching a couple documentaries. Well, I won't say too much, but we're going to be launching a couple documentaries, and that requires money. There's no guarantee that we make all of our money back from doing these things, but I think it's important that we cover the news and we launch these projects. It's with your support, we'll do more. So go to timcast.com, sign up in the top right of the screen. You'll see it. Smash that like button, subscribe to this channel, share the show with your friends. Let's read the first story from the Daily Caller. Night of Rage. Eerie flyers pop up in D.C. ahead of Roe v. Wade decision. They report, unsettling flyers have begun to appear throughout Washington, D.C., warning of riots should the Supreme Court overturn Roe v. Wade. The flyer, which has circulated on social media, was also reported on by the Wall Street Journal, warns of a night of rage should the High Court overturn the landmark ruling as anticipated. D.C. call to action. Night of rage. The night SCOTUS overturns Roe v. Wade hit the streets. You said you'd riot. The poster continues. To our oppressors. If abortions aren't safe, you're not either. The poster is signed Jane's Revenge, a pro-abortion advocacy group that has taken responsibility for several attacks on pro-life organizations. It's overt terrorism. It's overt. A letter purportedly from Jane's Revenge and posted to the anarchist library says the impending decision is an event that should inspire rage in millions of people who can get pregnant. Do you mean women? We need the state to feel our full wrath. We need them to be afraid of us. Whatever form your fury takes, the first step is feeling it. The next step is carrying that anger out into the world and expressing it physically. Consider this your call to action. On the night, the final ruling is issued. A specific date we cannot yet predict, but we know is arriving imminently. We are asking for courageous hearts to come out after dark. The letter asks individuals to make your anger known. The organization also released a statement recently saying the leash is off for attacks on pro-life operations, promising violent attacks against oppressive infrastructures. Rest assured that we will. And those measures may not come in the form of something so easily cleaned up as fire and graffiti, the group warned. What are they talking about? Killing people? Jane's Revenge has taken credit for a Molotov cocktail attack on the offices of Wisconsin Family Action in May, while other pregnancy centers have been vandalized, including one with the slogan, Jane Says Revenge, spray painted on the Capitol Hill Pregnancy Center. A Linwood, Washington pregnancy center was vandalized with the words Jane's Revenge. And if abortion isn't safe, you aren't either in May. The Washington Examiner reports FBI investigating series of attacks and threats against pregnancy centers and faith-based groups. Well, okay, I'm glad to see that. Forgive me if I'm a little biased, but I just wonder why it is that my workplace can be harassed relentlessly, and it is. That my employees can be harassed relentlessly, and they are. That cyber crimes can be committed against my associates, and they have been. that we have been swatted 8 times. Yep. We have had the bomb squad show up. Notice I'm in a different place, huh? We've had to spend, I think we're looking at 6 figures plus on enhanced security, probably more. We've had a credible threat that forced us to evacuate our studio. All of this well documented, the credible threats. Some of it was reported on and easily provable. The police are even seen on camera on the property. Yet we don't make the cut with the mainstream press. You'd think that one of the big, most prominent primetime political shows would have some coverage. It's not. We're ignored. The far left, and we have evidence, strong evidence that it is, far left hacker groups and things like that, they get away with it. We take a look at what's going on, and the FBI is investigating, sure, but what about the 2020 riots? Where's the accountability for the 30 plus dead? No. The machine is clearly enforcing everything in one direction against the right. They say January 6, January 6, January 6 over and over again. But it was a far leftist that just tried to kill Kavanaugh. It's far leftists that are protesting in front of the homes of Supreme Court justices. Where's federal law enforcement? Oh, but they can show up to a garage over a pull rope. Yep. They can raid the homes of a GOP frontrunner in Michigan. They can raid the home of the wrong woman. I believe she was in Alaska. Maybe it was Washington, I'm not sure. The wrong woman, because she looked like someone who was in the Capitol. Yet they can't figure out who has been abusing multiple people swatted. It's not just me. The quartering. Jeremy Hambley got swatted, and it seems like it was the same person. A person who maybe even slipped up. We think we know who's doing it. Where's law enforcement? They've not conferred with me. I've got no information about what's going on. The media doesn't report on it. Some outlets, the Post-Millennial and the Daily Wire did. It's fascinating. No, to me it just says there are certain people who are more equal than others, as the saying goes. That we do political shows, we comment on the law and on elections, on politics, but we are not considered of equal protection, as it would seem. Now, look, maybe they're working on the stuff behind the scenes, but they don't tell us. We have no idea. Same old, same old. In fact, the last time we talked to the cops, they were like, have they given you any updates? I'm like, no one's told me anything. We've received no updates. We have no idea. Even though we've cooperated, given evidence, seems like nothing's happening. And it seems like, based on what we know, they could shut it down in 2 seconds. So I have to wonder how it is they haven't arrested these people yet. Here's the story from the National Review. Jane's revenge threats against pro-lifers presage a new bleeding Kansas. It's a scary thought. Wesley Smith writes, I wrote that the country is entering a violent time akin to bleeding Kansas, an era during the 1850s when pro- and anti-slavery partisans, most famously the abolitionist terrorist John Brown, violently contested with each other for political control of the then territory. The alleged attempted assassination of Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh by a pro-choice fanatic is the most extreme of such recent actions. But partisans on both sides of political and cultural divides have been pursuing increasingly violent means of promoting their ideological desires. We've seen violence from Antifa, the Capitol rioters of January 6, BLM protests in which cities burned and people died, the violence at Charlottesville, the attempted mass assassinations of congressional Republicans that almost took the life of Representative Stephen Scalise, and in years past, the murders of abortionists. I'm going to pause. I don't completely agree with the characterization, but what you need to understand about Bleeding Kansas is the duration. It was 1854 to 1861. I mean, we're talking about 7 years of conflict. It wasn't just something that happened overnight. Now, we've seen violence against abortion centers and abortion providers. Those were a long time ago. I don't know where we're at now. There certainly is a lot of political violence, but most of it lower tier and coming from the left and gradually getting worse. Now they're going to say, as Catherine noted earlier, a radical pro-abortion group called Jane's Revenge, which claims to have burned and vandalized pro-life offices and crisis pregnancy centers, threatening at some locales, has just issued a communique threatening worse to come. From Jane's Revenge, another communique addressed to pro-life organizations. Communique is a very far left colloquial term. It's what the extremists that occupy Wall Street. And I don't mean the people that I mean the extremists that occupy Wall Street. The people who are pro-violence, pro-revolution. They called it their communique. Sure. You published an open letter. Calm down. It's not France. Enslavers? No one forces women to seek help at crisis pregnancy centers, which offer help for mothers both before and after birth. But then, logic and true compassion have nothing to do with any of this. Hello, Attorney General Merrick Garland, FBI and President Biden. Are you going to do something about this? Or keep pretending the biggest threats to peaceability and comity in the country are white supremacists? Let me give you a little history lesson. Not that I think Wikipedia is the best source on the planet, but let's talk about Bleeding Kansas and John Brown. We work very close to the John Brown raid headquarters. I've been there a couple times. It's crazy to see. This is a dude that just straight murdered people because he was like, you're bad people, murder you. The funny thing is, John Brown's ideology outside of the violence, he said the Declaration of Independence, all men are created equal, the golden rule. I'm like, I agree with that. He believed in freedom and he thought slavery was wrong. And John Brown was upset that abolitionists were pacifists and refused to do anything about the violence and the slavery. And so he said enough. And then he and his kids and supporters took action. Check this out. Bleeding Kansas. The conflict was characterized by years of electoral fraud, raids, assaults, and murders carried out in the Kansas Territory and neighboring Missouri by pro-slavery border ruffians and anti-slavery free staters. According to Kansapedia of the Kansas Historical Society, there were 56 documented political killings during the period, and the total may be as high as 200. It has been called a tragic prelude or an overture to the American Civil War, which immediately followed it. The conflict centered around the question of whether Kansas, upon gaining statehood, would allow slavery like neighboring Missouri, or prohibit it and join the Union as a slave state or free state. The question was of national importance because Kansas's 2 new senators would affect the balance of power in the U.S. Senate, which was bitterly divided over the issue of slavery. The Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854 called for popular sovereignty. The decision about slavery would be made by popular vote of the territory settlers rather than by legislators in Washington. Existing sectional tensions surrounding slavery quickly found focus in Kansas. So this was 7 years. The American Civil War, of course, started 1861. It led up to the Civil War. We don't say it was part of the Civil War. And that's the important thing I want to point out when talking about Civil War. We say historically April 12th, 1861, but hold on there a minute. I believe it was 7 states seceded from the Union well before that. Look at this. On the eve of the Civil War in 1860, 4 million of the 32 million Americans, 13% were enslaved black people, mostly in the South. They go on to mention the practice of slavery in the United States was one of the key political issues, et cetera, et cetera. During the 1861, the Civil War effectively ended April 9th, 1865. In the beginning, the secession crisis. It's absolutely fascinating. Let me read for you this so you can understand not that history repeats itself, but that it rhymes. For Wikipedia, they write, the election of Lincoln provoked the legislature of South Carolina to call a state convention to consider secession. Before the war, South Carolina did more than any other southern state to advance the notion that a state had the right to nullify federal laws and even secede from the U.S. The convention unanimously voted to secede on December 20th, 1860, and adopted a secession declaration. It argued for states' rights for slave owners in the South, but contained a complaint about the states' rights in the North in the form of opposition to the Fugitive Slave Act, claiming that northern states were not fulfilling their federal obligations under the Constitution. The cotton states of Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas followed suit, seceding in January and February of 1861 before Abraham Lincoln was even president. That's crazy. President James Buchanan, his term ended March 4th, 1861. So I tell you this. Bleeding Kansas was a period of 7 years before the Civil War where up to 200 people were killed over politics. So maybe we are some ways away from an actual civil war. Don't know. Or maybe it's not about the death. It's about the escalation. And we can take a look at the year 2000, George W. Bush, Al Gore, the conflict, what that led to throughout the 2000s, which brings us to the economic crisis. Then we get Occupy Wall Street. Then we get Donald Trump. And now here we are. We're living in history, a major historical moment. Many people just don't realize it because you're swimming in it. Many people don't realize you are frogs in a pot and the water is boiling. And I don't know exactly what's going to happen, but I can tell you, if you think 2016 mattered, if you think 2012, if you think 2008, 2022, the midterm elections is about 4.5 months away. And then the 2024 election. It's crazy to me, the naivety of people who think we are not heading in this direction. When you had a major lawsuit, Texas v. Pennsylvania, I'll say it a million times, I've been bringing it up over the past couple of days, arguing that 4 states were violating the Constitution over how they handled their elections. The Supreme Court refused to hear the case. Texas, having no resolution, has now asserted they do not see Joe Biden as legitimate, which is, in my opinion, it's just crazy. That's where we're going. What do you think is going to happen in 2024? You think a Democrat can win? I don't. And it's not just because Joe Biden's effectively burning this country to the ground. It's because Republicans and libertarians are winning. They're winning at the state level. Many of these people are furious that the demands the questions they asked, these lawsuits proposed were never even answered, dismissed on standing and not merit. And it's almost like it was on purpose. How stupid do the Supreme Court justices have to be not to realize that if you do not listen to the argument made by the Texas Attorney General, you will not shut down their argument. You will exacerbate their position, and they will escalate it in the years to come, making the threats to this country substantially worse. Props to Alito and Thomas, who said we should hear this out. But the other justices, being morons, cowards, or, for all I know, being malicious, ignored the case and said we won't hear it. The Texas AG argued about the constitutionality of voting. The Supreme Court could have taken it up and said, let's hear it. And they could have very easily said, the way that Pennsylvania handles their elections and their courts, they decide, not you. This argument is settled. Now, maybe Texas would not have been satisfied by that, but the Supreme Court would have at least said, we've heard your argument and here's our rebuttal. Here's our assessment. At the very least, you offered up the opportunity that some people in Texas and other red states might be like, to be fair, the Supreme Court, they gave us an argument. Instead, the Supreme Court said, shove off, don't know, don't care. So if you're somebody who is accusing another state of breaking the law or the Constitution, and the Supreme Court says, don't know and don't want to hear it, well, your opinion's not going to change. Your opinion will become entrenched. Next up comes more elections. In 2024, can a Democrat win? My fear is this. Republicans are outright refusing to accept the results of the 2020 election. That we know. The courts needed to hear the arguments. They didn't. So come 2024, what's to say that these Republican states don't just say, screw off, don't know, we're not certifying the results. It already happened in one county, one. Hopefully that's the end of it. They say a red wave is coming. Good. Get out and vote no matter what you think about the elections, because it matters. There's a wager meme going around. Let's just call it Trump's wager. It's not really Trump's, but if there really is fraud, and you think there is, and you vote, doesn't matter, right? If you don't vote, doesn't matter, right? But what if there isn't? What if you actually do have an impact and you don't vote? Now you're helping the other guys win. You're helping the Democrats win. And if you do vote, you're helping the Republicans win. So it stands. The best thing you can do is just go vote. Now, look, everything else I think should be investigated. I think should be heard in court so that we can restore confidence in our system. I believe there are too many people who want to believe they can't be wrong. I think I can be wrong. Show me evidence and I'll accept it. For the time being, I think the reality is lots of people hate Donald Trump. And that's why I think they fear Ron DeSantis. Because even Bill Maher said Ron DeSantis would be better. Yeah, Ron DeSantis has embodied a lot of what Trump embodied, but he's more tactful. He's younger with military experience, and he's a fighter and he's fearless. That's why I'm like, I think he's better choice. He's a better choice. I just don't know if he's going to drain the swamp. I think Trump would get in there and just. So for me, I'm up in the air. You know, I said a few months ago I'd probably prefer to vote for DeSantis in a 2024 election. If it were Trump, I'd vote for him. Just because I think what's happening in this country is getting crazy. But honestly, I just don't know. I think we are in this period. I think we are probably in the Bleeding Kansas period, which means pre-Civil War, civil strife. Call it whatever you want. We are seeing, according to Stephen Marsh, who wrote the book The Next Civil War, I believe more than 70 deaths per year, which means there are a lot more people. But if this were to go on for 7 years, we're looking at way more people than died during Bleeding Kansas, which ultimately led to the American Civil War. Perhaps that's why Bleeding Kansas ended, I suppose, because the Civil War started. That's where we are. I'm not a psychic, but I think it's important you pay attention to this stuff. I think it's kind of funny. A lot of people pointed out that, like, Tim, you talk about Civil War a lot, and then you move to Harper's Ferry. And I'm like, well, we're not literally in Harper's Ferry. We're in the tri-state, but we're really close. One of the most significant locations in the Civil War. And we can take our bikes and go ride. We're a little bit far away from the John Brown raid headquarters. Close enough. And there's memorial stuff there. Let's talk about what else we have that's leading us in this direction. Republicans demand FBI and DHS designate members of Jane's Revenge as domestic terrorists. I don't know if such a thing can be done. I mean, they can say the acts that are happening are terror. I also want to point out, are these women holding up plastic hangers? That's weird. I don't know if a plastic hanger would do the trick. It's supposed to be a wire hanger, but anyway, I digress. I don't know if the government can actually designate a group as domestic terrorists because of the First Amendment. They can designate the actions taken. Let's take a look at some more stories. Supreme Court gun record is sparse ahead of likely rights expansion. This one's important. Could there be a civil war? I don't know if New York Rifle and Pistol Association Inc. v. Bruin matters all that much in this context. But I think if the Supreme Court expands gun rights, it could actually prevent a civil war. I really mean it. The case is quite simple. New York, if you want to get a concealed carry permit, you got to give them a reason. They basically reject every reason, which is BS unless you're rich or famous. Maryland and New Jersey are similar. They're often referred to as no-issue states. No issue meaning they won't issue. Many states are shall issue. And that means they're obligated to issue a concealed carry permit. You can take a handgun, you can put it in your waistband, you can cover it up, or you can put it inside your jacket, you can conceal it. A lot of places don't like public open carry where people can see the weapon because people freak out. In New York, there's a lawsuit basically saying you can't do this. All right. You need to issue a permit. The narrow ruling here, in the event that it expands two-way rights, which everyone expects, is that New York, Maryland, parts of California, New Jersey will no longer be able to deny you a concealed carry permit. They can't require a reason. You need only apply, you get it. Now, most states require a handgun class, including West Virginia. West Virginia has constitutional carry, meaning if you're over the age of 21, you can walk in, do your background check, give your ID, buy a gun. And in fact, if you have a concealed carry permit in West Virginia, that is your background check. It clears you. You can buy a weapon, put it in a waist holster or put it in your coat and conceal it and walk out. You don't need any special permits. Or I'm sorry. In West Virginia, constitutional carry means that after you do a normal background check and buy it, you don't need a permit to conceal carry. If you do get a concealed carry, you got to take a course, a training course, and then I think 18 to 21, a concealed carry is required. Some states have reciprocity, meaning your concealed carry in West Virginia will work in other states, but Maryland, New Jersey, they don't allow it. These states are no issue, meaning even if you, in good faith, try to get a concealed carry, they're going to be like, get out of here. We're not giving it to you. Now, here's where the interesting thing is. The Supreme Court could potentially issue a broad ruling. They could say New York's requirement for a reason is a violation of the Second Amendment, but New York's requirement for a permit is also a violation. And this applies to all states. Could happen. Let me show you. From this article from Bloomberg Law, they say, the important one is here. D.C. v. Heller, the landmark 2008 decision that basically said that individuals have a right to keep and bear arms. However, that was at the federal government level. In McDonald v. Chicago, the 2010 decision struck down Chicago's handgun ban, finding that Heller applied to the individual states, not just federally. This means that after 2010, this is expansion of gun access and gun rights. States could not ban access to weapons, and they did. Now the argument is, as we continually expand, can you require a permit? I think it's an infringement upon your rights to keep and bear arms. I think it's clear cut. Will the Supreme Court be so bold as to say, if D.C. v. Heller applies to the individual states, their ruling would as well, and they say you cannot require a permit because that is the government infringing upon your right to keep and bear arms. It is. Look, I get it. If you're a liberal and you want gun control and you're like, no, it isn't. You can't. It is. Infringe. Okay? If the government requires you to fill out paperwork so they approve you having this, that means if you were keeping and bearing arms without government permission, a permit, a cop could arrest you for keeping and bearing arms. An infringement on your right to keep and bear arms. The government should have, according to no authority to arrest you for having a gun. Unless you've gone through due process. That means if you're charged with a felony and as part of your penalty, there's a period where you can't have a gun, that's due process. But we'll see. Now, here's my point. If they come out and say everybody can have concealed weapons, I don't think there's going to be riots nor civil war. Because when the far left shows up with their bricks and Molotovs, and all of a sudden everyone's strapped, you might see an initial spat of violence when the far left realizes you can't use terror against people anymore. Because all of a sudden these people showing up with guns and Molotovs will face an equal footing. These leftists are engaged in terrorism. Firebombs are not legal. They don't care. Many citizens I think there was a pregnancy center in Maryland. You can't protect yourself in Maryland. It's ridiculous. But what if they issue this ruling and all of a sudden everyone's walking around concealed carry and you won't know who? They don't even need to be carrying. Just the fact that you won't know if they are or aren't means you're going to be a bit more polite. An armed society is a polite society, and I'm telling you this as someone from Chicago. You know why? I can't tell you how many stories there were. I'll tell you a story. Some dude in my neighborhood, or where I grew up, parking his car, going to a party. Car was full of, it was like 5 people in the car. They didn't realize it, but they parked in front of a drug dealer's house. Drug dealer walks up and taps on the window and says, "What do you want?" They tell him, "F off." They get into an argument. The dealer's like, "Get out of here." Because what they do is you pull up, the dealer walks out of the house, throws it in the car. They yell at him. The dealer pulls out a gun, goes pop, pop into the car, 2 bullets into the gut of the dude sitting in the passenger seat. They peel out, didn't realize what happened, look over and see the dude bleeding to death. You see, that dude with the gun, he knew they didn't have a gun. Only criminals have guns. Those people in the car, they didn't think that guy had a gun. What happens when they come out and they say, no, everybody's likely armed? When you get into a road rage incident, this is what I always understood. I'd have people who would get road rage in Chicago, and I'd tell them to shut the up. Because you never know when you're going to scream at some dude who's illegally strapped because Chicago's got problems and it happens enough, who gets out of the car with the gun and points it at you. I've been shot at while driving in Chicago. I say, be polite. Be polite. And you know what? If the criminals are armed and they know you're not, they're not going to be polite to you. But if everyone's allowed to conceal carry, they might start. Let's change that culture. This could prevent the conflict. And I think it's fair to point out it could exacerbate it, but I don't think so. If the far left showed up with weapons and people aren't defending themselves, it's possible that when people start defending themselves, the far left comes out with weapons and starts shooting back. That's a fact. Considering what happened with Kyle Rittenhouse, we're already seeing people defend themselves. But I have to wonder what would happen. I don't know. I can't see the future, but I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up tonight at 8 p.m. over at youtube.com/TimCastIRL. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you all then.